we shared that your strengths are a stewardship issue because they are given to you by God. So where did this whole thing of strength start from? Where did this thinking begin? Did it begin in the minds of scientists like Don Clifton at the University of Nebraska 70 years ago? Or through any of the other scientists through some of the large universities where this is being taught as a science? Let me suggest to you, my friend, that the theology of strength, when we really begin to look at it, it starts way back in Genesis 1:26. When God said, let us create man in our own image, God had in mind two things. He thought of man as being holy because the Bible tells us, be holy because your Father in heaven is holy. But God also had in mind imparting to man some of his own character qualities. God wanted to instill in man some of his own character attributes so man could do good work. Let me give you examples. Some of you may have the strength of an achiever. When you did the Gallup Strength Finder survey, achiever was one of your top strengths. Actually, it's one of my top strengths. Is God an achiever? You see, an achiever delights in seeing things happen. He starts a project or an initiative, and then when it's done, he feels good. And he says, that was good. And the Bible tells us that's exactly what God did. When he created the sun and the moon and man and the sea, after every one of these, God said, that was good. And God delights in achievement. And you, if you have achiever as one of your top qualities, you are a reflection of God's strength. And you need to be proud and glad for it because it reflects God's character to the world. Some of you may also have the strength of communication. When you did the Gallup Strength Finder, communication was one of your top strengths. Does God have communication as one of his qualities? You bet he does. You know, God communicates through the environment. The Bible tells us that the heavens declare the glory of God and the firmament shows his handiwork. God communicated through the prophets. God communicated through the scripture. And he knew that we needed a model, so he came down to earth in the person of his son, Jesus Christ, so we can see a model. He was like us, tempted in every way, yet without sin, to set a model for us. Is God a communicating God? You bet he is a communicating God. And if you have communication as one of your top strengths, you are a reflection of God's communicating qualities. Some of you may have analytical as one of your top strengths. Is God analytical? Do you realize that science tells us that if the earth would move a few steps closer to the sun, we would all burn up. And if it moves away from the sun a few steps, we would all freeze to death. Examine the movement of the star and the universe and the galaxies. And folks, this is the reflection of a very analytical mind. A very precise analytical mind. And if you have analytical as one of your top strengths, you are a reflection of God's qualities. Some of you may have responsibility. When you did your Strength Finder, responsibility was one of your top 5. This happens to be one of my wife's top strengths. Does God have responsibility as part of his character attributes? You bet he does. He said, I will never leave you or forsake you. He said, even if a mother would forget her child, I will not forget you. He said that even the hairs on your head are counted before me. I guess he will have an easier job with my head these days. Is God a responsible God? You bet he is. And your responsibility is a reflection of God's responsible attributes and qualities. And you need to begin to be affirmed in this. Be proud of it. Be grateful for it. Show it out to the world. You don't hide a candle under a bushel. but you light it, show it to the world so it lights the environment so others can benefit as they see the light of God in your character. Pastor Rick Warren says that more than any other quality, your personalities, our personalities, is a reflection of God into the world. My friend, look at your strength with pride and with joy and use it for the glory of God. Well, this is all good and wonderful, but how do we define strength? How do we define strength? You know, if you go to a gymnasium and ask some of these athletes who are pumping iron to define strength, they're going to measure it in the kind of weight they can lift. If you go to a steel worker and you ask him to define strength, he's going to give you a completely different definition. If you go to a construction site and you ask someone pouring foundation and ask them about strength, they will define it differently. So for now, I think it would be good for us to go to the science of strength. The science of strength has been researched by many scientists in many of the leading universities around the world. And let's go and ask a scientist there, how do you define strength? And for this, I'd like you to go with me to the scientists at Gallup and see how they define strength. They say that strength is the ability to provide consistent, near-perfect performance in a certain activity. Allow me to say this one more time. It's an ability to provide consistent, almost perfect performance in a given activity. Let me give you an example of what I mean. I have the ability to swallow. I have the ability to swallow. And I can do this every time, consistently, almost perfectly. I can do it again and again and again. And by the way, there are some people who cannot swallow. So it's an ability to perform an activity, almost perfect every time. Well, that's good, but where does strength come from? According to the science of strength, strength is a formula that starts with talent. Talent. So what is talent? How do we define talent? Well, again, allow me to go to the scientists at Gallup. They've been researching this for a long time, and I really like their definition. They say that talent is a naturally recurring patterns of thoughts, feeling, or behaviors that can be productively applied. Naturally recurring patterns of thoughts, feelings, or behaviors that can be productively applied. Let me give you an example of what I mean. Two people walking down the street, and they see a child that have just fallen off a bike, and he's bleeding from the head. One person would naturally run to the child, pick him up to comfort him and give him a hug. Another person would naturally reach to his cell phone and dial 911. These are two different behaviors, two different set of feelings, and two different thoughts, two different talents. So talents are naturally recurring patterns of thoughts, feelings, or behaviors that can be used productively. Well, but where do they come from? Where do they start? Friends, this literally floored my mind when I read it. Now, science tells us this, that 42 days after the beginning of pregnancy, 42 days, you are just a tiny little thing. 42 days, my friend, this is 42 days, almost your mother did not even know she was expecting. 42 days after the beginning of pregnancy, the brain begins to develop neurons. And for the 120 days that follow, the brain creates more than 100 billion neurons. That's 9,500 per second. 9,500 neurons per second. Now, 60 days before you're born, these neurons begin to talk to each other. developing what is called synaptic pathways. Synaptic pathways. Think of them as almost roads connecting homes in a city. Now, between that time to age 3, more than 15,000 synaptic connections are built up in your brain. Between the age of 3 to 15 or 16, some of these pathways are used more heavily and more frequently, and they get stronger and bigger. They almost become like highways in a city. Others are neglected, they are less used, they atrophy and they get weak. Now, where I live, we have 2 major highways that connect the city from east to west. So if I'm living where I am and I need to go to the airport, I would take the highway. It's a wide highway, and I know I can get there fast. I do not go through the side streets. So over these few years of your life, up to age 15 or 16, these highways are built up, and they become big and strong and used more frequently. That's your talent. That's your talent. That's where you're naturally inclined to behave. This is how you're naturally inclined to think and act and feel. That's your talent. Well, this is all wonderful, but where do strengths come from? We know they start with talent, but these talents are multiplied, are developed and built up through the knowledge you acquire, the skills you develop, and the experiences of life. So what do we mean by knowledge? Knowledge is anything you know, anything that you can gain through reading, through studying, through watching other people. This is all knowledge. You can collect knowledge in your brain. But skills are the steps required to take knowledge and use it productively. Let me give you an example. You can learn everything you need to learn about a car through reading a book. You can learn what the wheels are for, what the engine does, what the transmission does, what the brakes do. You can learn all of this, but you cannot drive a car until you learn the steps of getting into the car, sitting down, turning the ignition on, and starting the car to move. But then comes experience, and that's the application of your talent, your knowledge, and your skills to the environment in which you live. And that varies based on the experiences of life. You see, my friend, when we take talent, knowledge, skills, and experience, guess what we call that? We call it wisdom. Wisdom. And it's the application of all of this to the life in which you are placed and in which you accomplish things. I'd like you now to do a small exercise. I'd like you to find a partner, and a partner that you're going to be with through the rest of the workshop. And with your partner, I'd like you to talk about what you think and what you feel about what you just heard. What do you think and how do you feel about this whole concept that you are created in the image of God? What did you think and how did you feel when you first read your report, your Gallup Strength Finder report? How did you think about that? I'd like you to take about 10 minutes with your partner and talk about what did you think and how did you feel. And let's take about 10 minutes. And after that, your facilitator will call to your attention, and that will be the end of this session. Now, please, I'd like you to take some personal study. Take some time and read from the very beginning of your workbook, the Living Your Strength book, to the end of exercise 2. That's your personal study. Have a good time.